So we're going to go right into the new business, which is the 6-month plan. And this is really looking at the post-dam failure situation where we are, and then the recovery plan going forward. So remind the board and those attending that this was the slide we showed at the last meeting, a little bit of modification to it, but significantly intact from where we were, which we were going to come back to this with this meeting and kind of have a more detailed approach on how we are going to get to the engineering and design approvals by May, and that's the kind of alignment on the chart that shows plans submitted to the state in May. Our view is that's about the timing we want approval, and that's the window we have to go through. For dams, how we're going to work through that and put the framework and stuff together, and to review kind of the next activity over of having the approval to move forward on the interim financing and the engineering for the restoration of the dams. So we'll walk through those slides as we go, and then we'll open up the Q&A at the end. Okay, so the next slide, please. A real quick update on the bankruptcy. On July 31st, Boyce Hydro and Boyce Hydropower filed for bankruptcy protection under Chapter 11 of the Bankruptcy Code. That basically is a structure that allows a company to stay in business while they're restructuring. They only filed their operating entities. In other words, Boyce Hydropower has the FERC license and has the power agreements with consumers, and Boyce Hydro is the operating entity that runs the dams. All the assets related to the dams and the bottomlands, those are in other legal entities of Boyce, and they did not put those in bankruptcy. And so we did file condemnation at that same time on those properties to take those. In Chapter 11 proceedings, basically all efforts to collect on debt are halted or stayed, and anyone having a claim must proceed to the bankruptcy court to receive that, what's owed to them. And so we have claims as it relates to costs that occurred during the event on our effort to support Boyce. And then the other issue we have is we have place to stay in. Have filed we're asking for a hearing of stay to stay the bankruptcy as it relates to the condemnation, so allow us to proceed with the condemnation. That will happen later this month. So there's a lot of procedures between bankruptcy and the condemnation, and it's going to be kind of a churn procedurally for a while, but we remain confident that the counties will acquire the properties before the end of the year. Next slide. We're spending less time on this and getting more time into the kind of long-term plan, because this was a lot of our discussion over the last 5 webinars over the we've had at least, I think, this month on with one for each dam, and whatever was really the restoration side of this and that. So the big key issue here is trying to address the $40 million of post-dam failure recovery around stabilization of the dams, erosion of the bottomlands, and the debris that remains on primarily the Sanford Dam and the bottomlands of Sanford and Wixom. We within 60 days, Four Lakes Task Force engaged with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Services, NRCS, and they have a program that deals with erosion, debris management, and actually the dams as well as it relates to public waterway and watershed. And so we signed up as a sponsorship for that program within the first 60 days to be eligible. And so for the significant investment we're making, the NRCS will pay for not all the upfront in administration, but when we get into the construction phase of that, they will pay for 75% of the funds to address those areas. So that's a very significant area to work through. We have $2.5 million that just came through the legislation to be approved. It's just going to the governor's desk this week. We believe it will be supported, and that will help us offset the other 25% for the amount that we would have to cover. Now, this all being said, we all agree that the issue here is that Boyce is the entity that's accountable for this, but the burden is coming on us to kind of go clean this up as he enters into bankruptcy. On the dams themselves, State of Michigan, Port Lakes Task Force, and NRCS has a project underway for the tobacco spillway to stabilize that and position it. And that also includes now looking at the Edenville spillway. Our estimate is that it's a $6 to $8 million project effort that we're working through. The funding of the Sanford Dam has been approved by NRCS. We're waiting for the paperwork, but we would expect to, by the end of the month here, to get the debris off the Sanford Dam. We still have to do erosion management on that dam as well. There are going to be repairs. We know that from FERC. We have not seen the reports on Seaport and Small World. They remain unknown. We have reserved between $500 and $1 million, we think, on repairs on those dams. We do not know what they are, but we do need to get in there. That's part of the condemnation. Do our safety evaluation because we haven't got the reports from Boyce, and make sure we get those dams understood in terms of just the stabilization, get through the rain and season and the winter drawdown. And then the significant effort we've covered in all the other broadcasts in the last 3 or 4 weeks here, and had a special meeting on the erosion and debris. Roughly $20 million in work, funding. We've got the first 11 projects submitted of over 50 projects. This is one where we know we're putting a burden on some of the homeowners, but we're trying to work hard to get some funding from the state to offset that. Some of that, have that figured out over the next week or two as we go forward with this. But we're in the process of moving those projects through the federal government now for approval. Okay? So we can move to the next slide. So that was just the background on restoration. We spent most of the month kind of dealing with that. So what we really want to do is kind of go to the next phase, which on that chart was a feasibility plan, and the feasibility plan we'll walk through. We anticipate the cost of this study to be about $600,000, and we're targeting for it to be completed by March. The idea is to kind of restate the position in terms of the uses of this property as lakes and demonstrate that to get the right framework and design standards set for the dams, get the right design, look at finances and affordability and the implementation schedule. So what we're going to do is basically walk through the kind of outline of that so people understand it. It's more detailed than this plan we're publishing, so people have an expectation process that we're going to go through in the next 6 months to kind of get the numbers we showed in last quarter down to our last meeting, down into a number that we can actually get financed to do the engineering study and move forward. So we're going to cover the outline of that study now. Okay? Am I supposed to be talking into that, or is that you? No, okay, I'm talking right there. Let me just move over a little bit, get a little noise. Okay, so the feasibility study, and we'll go through it in a little bit more detail, has a flood study. It's going to look at the probable maximum precipitation calculation and the probable maximum flood study calculation. It's going to do a qualitative assessment on the impacts. It's going to confirm the design for each of the dams, and it's going to look at the impact in terms of a probable maximum flood, a half maximum flood, a 500-year flood, and and down to a 100-year flood, and make sure that we're confirming the designs for each of those dams. And then the second part will be, the second aspect of it is engineering, which is the value engineering exercise of the key design parameters to try to lower those estimating costs we provided, to look at the non-structural design criteria that we have, things like the environmental impact and other things, and then look at the preliminary design to rebuild or replace or repair each dam, and then come up with a more defined cost estimate that can be financed. It'll go through a financial analysis, and we'll show you some rough views of where we currently think the estimate on the assessments are, an implementation plan, and then an operational maintenance plan as we go forward. So going to the next level of detail, this is the map of the Tittabawassee Basin. And so it's a little bit busy, but I think it's important to understand, if you look at the purple or lavender section in the middle, that is kind of where Sanford Dam sits, and you can see the kind of, in a small view, the water system that relates to the Four Lakes Dam. The flood system that we're going to be looking at is the brown area on top, which is what they call the Sanford Lake watershed. This is where all the water comes there. We'll be doing that study all the way down to through the dam, through the Sanford Dam, through all the other four dams, into actually where the Tittabawassee meets the Salt River. The other two areas and lavender are other parts of the watershed that go down into further down the Tittabawassee and interface into Midland through the other river systems that are there. This is not in the scope of what Four Lakes is doing, but we've worked with the Army Corps of Engineers. They have a risk plan that they are willing to look at, taking our flood input as well as the other aspects of the basins that go through Midland County, and basically do an overall risk assessment for Midland. This has never been done to our measurement in terms of since the mid-'80s when the 100-year flood occurred. A study wasn't done there to this level of detail, and so we've recommended to the Midland County, and connected the Midland County and City of Midland with the Army Corps to kind of do that study so they can feel confident in terms of the whole basin aspect. A point of fact that people may or may not know on the phone or on this webinar is that most of the water that goes from Midland, through Midland, through the city of Midland, about 60% of it is outside of the dam system. So the brown area there contributes about 40% to Midland, and the other parts of the watershed here contribute about 60%. So as we've said in these studies, the structure of these lakes aren't really designed for water retention and flood management. The basins just aren't that big. We certainly shouldn't have dam failures, but if we're going to look at mitigation for downstream of these, we have to look downstream of all the rivers and manage it as such. And so we want to just make sure that there's confidence downstream as well as the community on the flood studies and the impact other aspects of the basin study. Next slide. The other one is the financial cost and review of it. Cost and assessments will be done in this study. We've done some high-level calculations. We went through those in the last board meeting, and we reviewed lake by lake in more detail at the other webinars on the meeting. And the overall estimate was approximately $338 million as the baseline, with potentially a negative 30% overage of 50% as the confidence range, targeted at a useful life of 75 years or greater. And so as we've done our peer review, we see the confidence range of that number somewhere between 250 and 400 million. And obviously we talked about value engineering and structures to bring that number down. But we also have to look at the flood studies and stuff, which may bring that number up. But right now we have the planning number we've discussed. And in that planning number is about $15.5 million. This is purely an estimate off of approximately 5% needed for the engineering study in the phase after we finish this one. So what we looked at here is what we're trying to do now is understand the cost basis for estimating the homeowner's assessment, which will be one of the things that we do over the next several months in this study. We'll determine the project cost and range. We'll look at the estimated assessment by homeowner that will vary by lake, with each lake paying for its own repair cost, but having an overall Four Lakes kind of structure for operational costs to work through. Let's go to the next slide. What happened to the assessment numbers? That was pretty interesting. Didn't we have?
Next,
to
this one.
Is that the last slide?
No.
What did we do? Right here?
Yeah, this is where we're at.
Oh, okay. Okay, it's a little bit different order, but I'll handle it. So then the other part is we're looking at the operational maintenance costs are in this thing as well. So what we need to do this year is basically understand how to manage the lakes at their current level, not the legal lake level, make sure the bottom lands are structured. And so we'll look at the operating costs over the next 3 years, which will be different than the long-term operating costs that we're estimating to be about $500,000 a year once we're in steady state. And in that, as we're trying to acquire the property, we're also putting an organization in place. There'll be potentially all staff within Four Lakes, or maybe other outsourced or contracted services, and we're putting that together now as we go forward, and that will be built in the final will be built in the feasibility study. Bringing those inputs in, the repair cost base is so taking the operation base of $500,000 a year long term, looking at these case by case repair estimates, and that's taking the $338 million as a base case and looking at the numbers, and then looking at the assessment district as we have today, broken down in front lots and back lots. And the assumption here is that a back lot would probably pay 25% of the assessment of the front lot. And so these numbers have been shared. They haven't significantly changed and haven't changed since May, but this is what we're working on as we went through the assessment methodology over the last year and a half. So taking those two factors, we have come up with some assessment numbers, and they look like this. They go from Secord to Smallwood. The top line looks at the base case, so that 338 spread by dam, so that's why you see different numbers, with 30-year financing at about 2.25%. The middle line, which is kind of our targeted number, is the same assumption on the cost for construction, but having 40-year financing. And so you see that having 30-year versus 40-year financing really helps reduce that number anywhere from 20, roughly around 23 or 4 to as much as 28% kind of range. So it's really important that we get 40-year financing. We're actually trying to run through legislation. The Part 307 doesn't support 40-year financing, and we're in the process of working with the legislation to change that to 40-year financing. So 40-year financing is critical to keeping the assessment numbers lower. And then the assumptions that we've given here in the red box is what we're working from in terms of our planning assumptions, is that we can get down to the base case as a reasonable number, and we're not looking at a worst case right now, which would be 50% higher than that. So the assumptions that we're working through is the high end of the assessments would be in that middle line. For example, 339 for Secord, 585 for Smallwood, 2100 for Wixom, and 2400 for Sanford. And the best annual cost low end, if we would get the 30% reduction in engineering costs, would be that lower number to work through. And so that's how we got to those. And on 3 points below, you see those factors. It's critical that we have 40-year financing. We believe we have legislative and administrative support on that, so we believe that will happen. Assumption the projects are between the low and the base range of GEI. That's probably the most aggressive discussion. We need to get the engineering down, but we need to understand that the spillway capacity is a major item in that area to address, with the view of what the flood capacity has to be, and that's a high variable there. These are numbers that for Secord would be similar to the numbers that were even though the costs are higher, the financing that can be stretched out longer, it lowers these numbers. Smallwood is a little more challenged on the higher end of what was previously done, a very high end of what was previously done. And you can see the real challenge in the funding because you're rebuilding the other two dams, puts you in, in a roughly a $1,500 to $2,200, $2,300 range, which is very significant to work through. Okay, next slide. So obviously the critical issues here to make this happen is to get the financing to 40 years and to exhaust all efforts beyond just having this funded by the Special Assessment District. So what we're going to be looking at is other allocations from government that we can get, other grants, other funding, rating and endowment, looking at other sources of revenue, maybe, for example, looking at access from access fees from people that are non-residents and other things. So one of the key issues here is to have a plan that we go forward that we understand they're going to have to be financed by the Special Assessment District. And then rest assured, we're going to try to exhaust everything we can to lower these numbers in terms of finding offset costs once we get the kind of engineered number in place. And we also recognize that this has a displacement impact on some folks that can't afford these numbers. And we'll be looking for grants, and there are some government programs out there that can support people in handling the transition of an assessment like that. So that's a critical issue. It's probably the #1 issue as we go forward that we recognize the community is going to be looking at beyond just getting the lakes up. I would also say another one that's critical for us right now is these recovery costs. We're a responsibility of Boyce. The government still sees them as a responsibility of Boyce, but the reality is they're becoming a burden to the community. And we are probably, while we've gotten really a good program with the National Resource Conservation Services and the states starting to step up, we still are probably $10 million to $15 million short of having that totally funded and not getting it back on the burden of all the property owners. I don't know if we can get the property manager owner's match to zero, but we're going to certainly try to offset that match as we go forward. And then, a big issue here is, and we've talked to every government agency, is for us to get access to these properties quickly and do the vital work that's needed. As time passes, this environment's still fragile and still unstable. And frankly, the government structure to transition something like this is slow, but we're very aggressive in trying to make this thing transition as fast as we can. Okay. So this is a big deal in terms of both the size and the structure, but also the impact economically if we don't do this, and then the affordability for individuals if we do it. And we're going to have upcoming meetings. Obviously, we have our board meetings. We're going to have several meetings over the next course of the next 2 months. It's on the meeting tab where we'll be meeting with counties. Obviously, we'll be meeting with townships. We'll have stakeholders meetings to cover the subjects and stuff to work with. As we get through the early part of next year, we'll do a lot more public meetings as we get the numbers more refined. The other thing we're going to do is go through a lake-by-lake survey in the first quarter as we get these numbers kind of to the next level of precision. and make sure that every property owner gets their chance to understand what we're trying to do and explain to us, us being the Four Lakes Task Force, us being the counties, on what they feel is an acceptable level of assessment, and then the burden this assessment will create for them individually. And so we'll take a survey of that to kind of understand the impact to inform everyone as we move forward. Next one, get on. Okay, so as we've said before, we're trying to get all the government support we can, but at the end, we're working on a path that we are, together we can restore these lakes, the dams, the communities. We brought a high level in and encourage you to read the report that's going to come out. It takes these points as very comprehensive. We just want to hit the highlights today. The board has seen and reviewed that report, and so we'll be calling on votes after the period of questions. But at this point in time, we'll open it up for Q&A. And do we have a, I don't see the questions.
Let me get them up there. A first question you could address, though, was there were questions about why is Sanford's assessment higher when their cost to repair is lower?
Okay, so yeah, we're working on that questions here. So, okay, you just have to give them to me. So the question is just to understand the assessment numbers of the lakes, and maybe put those assessments. Will we put that slide back up?
Yeah.
Stacey, can you give me a glass of water or all over there?
Yeah, use that one.
Opened it
Just lifted it.
Okay, if you look at this, so basically in all those numbers is approximately $80 of this $500,000. If you take the $500,000 annual, about $80 across from that is from there. So Sanford, the two things that drive this number are the actual cost of the repair and then the assessment number. So if you back up one more slide just to cover it, if you look at what's feeding, one more, if you look at what's feeding, the one that shows the cost, keep going, that one there. So if you see that, so obviously Sanford and Wixom come out about the same. It's because Sanford's number, Wixom is a 2-dam system, roughly. Sanford is 1-dam system, I mean, in terms of spillways and structure. So there's 2 rivers on Wixom, 1 on Sanford. So it's twice as much to go on Sanford. But if you look at the numbers, Wixom has significantly more people on the lake than Sanford, and that's why their number is low. Lower, I'm not saying it's lower than, that's why Wixom and Sanford are comparable, even though Wixom costs are a lot lower. And if you look at Secord and Smallwood, Secord has almost 2,000 people on it, so twice the amount and a quarter of the number of Sanford. And so that is why you get to those kind of numbers. So when you start doing this lake by lake, they look significantly different, and working through that. So that's the methodology of how we went through that.
Do you assess?
Why don't you put the assessment back up, as I'm sure people ask that. But then what's the next question? So I'm not going to be able to see the questions. So.
Do assessments assume that homeowners are covering all of the costs, as in there's no grants figured into the assessment estimates here?
Yes. So yes, that is correct. We are, what we've said here is the question is there any major grants figured into this assessment? And the answer to that is no. So what we didn't want to do is we didn't want to go through this program and bank on things we don't have. So if we could, if you look at this $300 million, to swing this number to get it down another third, you're going to need, $80 to $100 million. So that kind of optimistic look of trying to get a grant is not in there. So when we talked about the assessment differences in this, We didn't factor the worst case of engineering in. We didn't factor 50% in. As you see, we started the base case. We believe we can value engineer for that. But the challenge is this was a base case on a half a PMF. It may, in fact, end up being more than that. And so we're trying to be balanced with that. And it doesn't have any grants in it, but I don't want to set expectations that if we get a lot of grants, that only may be offsetting something else. So I think it's reasonable to expect, it's really hard to get these numbers, say for Sanford and Wixom, below $1,000. It might be possible to get them in that $1,200 to $1,500 range, and we're going to work on that. So when we say we're going to exhaust every method, yes, we're going to look at state financing, federal financing. In the world of not too many earmarks, that's hard to do, but we're also going to look at any kind of grants we can develop and any other kind of revenue. So there's two. Well, so we're going to look at that. But no, we have not factored any grants in that to do.
If a property owner has a lakefront property and a back lot, will they be assessed for both?
Yeah, so I don't know if we're going to go through every scenario of like backlots and structure, but as we did before, we're going to follow probably the same method and protocol. So if you had like in the past when we reviewed the assessments before the failure, these are based on those rules. We'll go back and look at those, but no, if you had a back lot and a front lot, you didn't have to do it. Commercial had a different number. I would say these numbers are, as you can see, the range of them, these factors will be considered, but we're still, we're almost got so I can read the questions.
Yeah. Just about there.
Okay, good. Okay, good.
There you go.
Okay, good stuff. So those are some of the questions here. Are they kind of, which way are they going? They're kind of going back.
The oldest will be on top.
Oh, the oldest will be on top. Okay. So these are significantly greater than 300. But we didn't want to insult people's intelligence. If the number went from a $35 million number to a $300 million, you see that applying it differently here. And I think some of our assumptions that we had in the prior things, while we're looking at hydro is not included in these numbers, we're looking at that as a potential for offset. But hydro will not, by any stretch, finance any of these dams 100%. So if we could augment with hydro, we'll look at that to do. And so if you go back and look at, if you go read the report, it goes a little bit more detail in that. And like I said, we'll be, just like we did last time, we'll go through a whole bunch of series to make this thing a little bit tied in. How many years will this assessment be in place? This is, it's 40-year financing, so you should see this as a long-term assessment. And like 40 years is what the number will be. And we will break it down once we get to more refining on how that will look over that period of time to work through. Then the other question I see here is there's some question about voice transferring document. As we put the question is seeing documents showing voice transferring their property to their lawyers. I don't believe that is possible, but they are transferring them between their, I've seen they have made adjustments on the property we've condemned, and what they're trying to do is structure. We don't support it, but what they're trying to do is have this premise that they can restructure their company, leave the bad stuff with the community, and somehow get value out of it. And we object to that kind of approach, and it can't be covered up with whatever they're doing on that to work with that. The hearing dates for eminent domain. There's two steps. By next week, we will get a view from Boyce if they're going to challenge the necessity. So that, remember, in condemnation, in terms of the eminent domain hearing date, there are two dates. One is one of necessity, And if Boyce doesn't challenge on necessity, then we go to a court case on value if they don't accept our offer. And so at this point in time, that court, they have until next week to tell us if they're going to argue necessity on any of the dams. And then will be a case staged after that. There's also dependency on a filing we gave with the bankruptcy judge to work to basically stay the bankruptcy related to allowing these properties to be going into condemnation rather than being held up in bankruptcy. So that'll occur over the next a week or two and by mid-September. So we feel like by end of September, we'll very be clear on where the dates are unstructured and how much Boyce will contest or not, or if they'll go another kind of form of bankruptcy like liquidation or whatever. So I think, apologize it's taken this long. It's an administrative process and legal process. It takes a few weeks, and we still got a few weeks to go on that to do. Our people who use public assets going to be charged the fee to help offset. As I said in the presentation, under this Part 307, that's not something that you would look at, and at the end of the day, it's the special assessment is that financial last resort, but yes, we will look at that. And in other words, we have to get a plan that the special assessment district would fund, and that's what we presented today. But we are going to look at all sources of revenue, and one of those I don't believe will be general taxing of Midland and Gladwin County for this thing, but it could be looking at some type of access fee and service fee to go on, but we'll have to make sure that that actually generates value relative to the cost, because there's a lot of access points on these lakes to manage. Am I seeing the whole picture? So I'm not.
You didn't.
Do we have more direction? So shifting over a little bit, do you have any more direction for property owners on weeds, small trees? We've talked to the Eagle. They are going to have guidelines out within the week. They've committed to review that with us this coming, actually the next few days, and then they'll be kind of pushed out and communicated both by Eagle and Four Lakes on what people can do on the weeds, the structure with that. That is a long-term issue, not long-term, but a multi-year issue as we go through transition to manage the weeds down and trees on these lake bottoms to make sure we get prepared for the dams here. It seems that yes, we answered that. If properties have the same subdivision, the same whole truth as before, I can't read the whole thing. So what does Kelly ask there? Can you read that one? I move these longer, I guess.
It's a really long.
Okay, I apologize. I'm only seeing half of these. I can only see the front. Can I click on them?
I'm not sure what Kelly's asking.
I see it. Properties in the same subdivision, if you've got front and back lot, we won't charge it differently. If there's contiguous sections, we will come with this feasibility study and come back and have the special assessment district structured. We believe the basic rules of how a lot will be calculated is roughly the same as it was before, as it relates to how many units you get to apply, and then to make it equivalent. So we will come back in the next few months on these factors to go through. We have not gone to that level of detail yet, but we certainly will take the information we did before and factor that into our studies and stuff to work through.
Can you talk about the trees and the lake beds?
I said on the trees in the bed, yeah, I did answer. The trees on the lake beds were going to be done by the Eagle group to do. There is a question, and we got to kind of refine this. I accept it as a criticism that we have the names of people on here. We will go back and look at all these questions and make sure people get individually answered. And we'll get to a model where we can, in the next seminar, where we get people to kind of ask a specific question, we give a specific answer to an individual. And we'll build that up as we go forward and stuff to do. If the goal is for the counties to own the lakes and dams, why won't they I can't read that one. It's from Paul Cornell. Can you read that one for me?
Yeah, if the counties are going to be the ones owning the lakes and the dams, why wouldn't the counties pay for them?
So the counties, so that, this is the special assessment district structure. So the special assessment, the inland lake process is for a county to own a lake. If they're very small lakes, some counties take them out of general funds. But in general, that's why we have a special assessment district. So the county owns it, and they, by law, apply it to the folks that are going to have the most benefit from it. And that's the special assessment district that works through. That hasn't changed, and I don't think that the general county budget would pay for this, and it's not affordable for the general county budgets to pay for this. And so we're looking for other sources of resource to offset. But that is the nature of how a special assessment district on an impounded lake works. Why do property owners have to pay for the dam when everyone can use it? Again, it's the structure of the inland lake process and those that benefit the most. And again, in past presentations, I said, look, I'm not here to defend the legislative structure on this or the legal structure on it, but that's how it works. And so we will look at things like access now and say, well, maybe if you're coming to the lake, you pay a charge. We'll look at that kind of in our screen of ideas to offset these assessment numbers. We can go to the county. We'll talk to the county about general assessments, and that would have to be voted on by the whole county. And I frankly doubt that is the one source we'll look through for the county to provide this, but we'll go through that. What was Paul's question? We had previously discussed something.
Getting water back into Secord and Smallwood. Perhaps.
Oh, so where are we at on Secord and Smallwood? So where we are in Secord and Smallwood is Boyce Hydro was ordered to take those dams down. Boyce Hydro was ordered to do inspection reports. Boyce Hydro was ordered to also start an independent investigation. FERC has taken over the independent investment funding and have it in right now in enforcement with FERC. All the other studies have not been completed on time, and Boyce is delinquent. So we expect FERC to take action. They have not yet, but I say most of the things that Boyce were asked to do, he's been delinquent on and insufficient on responding to, and I believe FERC will have consequences to that. In the meantime, we don't have the numbers and the structures that would suggest what needs to be done, but we know based on the FERC reports that there are repairs that will need to be done just to stabilize this for running through the winter, and we have reserved money for that. And we believe that, for example, Secord needs a spillway, and we'll have to build that, and so we're working through that. We should have the challenges is that Boyce, after numerous requests, have not shared that information with us, has put that under confidentiality in the FERC system that we can't get, and so we're working through that with the courts. Status of M30 and the Curtis Road Bridge. Ron, you may have better timing, but I think Curtis Road Bridge should be done in by the end of the month or early October. Yeah.
Schedule on the bridges varies. Which bridge was it?
Curtis Road.
Thanks for both of them.
They just got FHA funding going today. I think it's going to be longer.
Okay, so by the end of the year. So I thought we had I see him working on Curtis Road, but
So Curtis is going to be last.
okay.
The bridge immediately north of Eatonville is close to being repaired. And the next one, Dave, I believe, is the temporary bridge just south of Stryker's.
Okay.
Right. And then Curtis Road Bridge, they do expect to have it back in operation yet this year.
Oh, okay.
For that.
Okay, so M30 is later. I mean, it's going to be a pretty big construction thing, but they believe they can get it done by the end of the year. And I think they're still kind of in the process. We haven't got like end dates on those things, but that'll be a thing we'll come back and get people on to do. Did you address the FEMA well issue already? We didn't, not in this meeting, but it is something that has been brought up with FEMA. It's also been brought up with the USDA, Rural Development. They do have funding for water activity or well improvements and stuff, and I think we've been trying to get that to the counties. The counties, I think, understand that. We'll come back with a specific answer for folks on that, on wells and where they can go for resources on our website. It's really being handled in the counties. Would the counties be able to sell the dams at a later date once they have possession? Actually, no. I mean, and once they get possession of the dams, and it's under Part 307, and they have control, they cannot relinquish control of the dams. So I guess there's some configuration you could imagine, but basically once the counties get the dams, they have to keep the dams under Part 307. I'm sure there's a legal nuance for that, but it's basically that's kind of how it works. Can the environmentalists block rising the water based upon the wildlife? I think the key wildlife
That is now moving into the land now created by the local.
No, I think the point we have here is that this is an environmental restoration project. This has legal lake levels established. This has been lakes for the last 100 years. They have been damaged by a failure to keep the dams in maintenance, and we are in a process with lake level established to work with the Eagles and DNR to establish a plan, and that'll be part of the feasibility study to make sure the water gets raised up or getting back to the legal levels. So I do not see, I think that's our position and right, and I think there'll be, when you say environmentalist, there's a lot of people that have lots of different views on things, but I think as we work through the state and Eagle and DNR, I think we're working in partnership to make sure we take in the factors of that in our feasibility study. But the intention here is to build these lakes back and keep them. Once the county has ownership as a dams, like they read that one. It's from Michelle Lynn Addington.
Mm-hmm. Would they be liquidable assets?
No. So yeah, the idea that can the counties take these and sell them? No. The whole point is these were brought to the county. They've had a resolution to make them lakes. They went to the court, the district courts to make them with lake levels. DNR, DEQ, the states, everybody signed off on this. A court order was placed. These are lakes. And so the issue is we've had an issue with the lakes and they need to be restored. And the intention, once we got to 307, they were always going to be part of the county. And we were basically, as a Four Lakes Task Force, the delegated authority of the Four Lakes Special Assessment District, which is the district that fundamentally is the funding source for that through assessments. But no, they can't make the lakes. They can't just sell the lakes after we go. And so any chance that Wixom and Sanford Lake will not be rebuilt, there's no path we're on right now that suggests that we know there's these critical issues of affordability, and but there's no physical or legislative or reason we can't do it. It's one of financial and community will to do it. And right now, I think we have the political support and to make that happen. And as a community, that's what we're here to do, is make sure we build these dams. And no, there's no discussion with DNR to make these lakes private. Can we get rid of boat launches to keep the lake private? The lake is not private. The lake is, I would point out that there's millions of dollars are being spent by the state to make sure we get support on these lakes. And so they aren't private in that we as individual lake owners are not buying the dam. They are being acquired by the counties through assessments. And so we can, I think it's fair to look at adjustments of access and other fees, and we'll look at other fees that would make sense to go through that. So for example, the county today had, there's parks where there are boat fees and stuff, and we will look at that. I would just condition people that it takes a lot of revenue to offset these numbers here to work with. And adjustments be readjusted once repairs have been made. So yes, assessments, there's three kinds of assessments that come in. There's assessments that are operational assessments. There's this kind of one-time build assessment, and there's improvement. If we find other sources, if we don't find all the answers in the next 2 years, and we find another way to offset costs with revenue in the future, then the assessment district or the assessments can be lowered to work. As property owners, can we mow down the weeds and trees on the lake bottom? We're going to have, again, that described from the DNR, what can be done and can't be done over the next week or two.
I have some more questions for you here. These came in via email. Do you want to take?
Yeah, I'm trying to get through these a little bit. If the county owns and benefits from the tax revenue, why are they not responsible? Okay, so I think I've answered that. Basically, the way you get a lake is you have a special assessment district, and they pay for it, so they're accountable for it. But the statute understands, just like drain fields and other things, that there are special assessment districts. And actually, if you look at your tax bill, I would imagine almost everybody has special assessments on their tax bills that have been voted in, and you could look at that. So this is not an unusual thing to be done. It's just a significant thing. Another part of that assessment has been weed assessments that you've seen for the last several years on your tax bills. So you have some other questions?
Yeah, where do you want me to put it? What is the legality of the reference on my deed which states that their property extends to the water's edge?
So what is the legal definition?
Does their property still extend to the water's edge? I believe is the question.
Okay, so sorry, we're like multitasking here now. So does your property extend to the water edge? No, there's a very few cases where people have riparian rights, kind of in the river areas, that may go to the center of the river. That's like less than a few percentage. In general, you have a property line that goes up to either Boyce property line or the Four Lakes Task Force if you happen to be on Sanford Lake. You have the legal right to access the property through the lake, but you don't own the property. And so you have to go back to your deed. There are some deeds that have the land below the water line, and there's almost all the deeds, most of the majority have them above. So you have the right to access, but the land does not become yours just because there's not water in there. In fact, the whole point of this is, even though there's not water in it, it's legally treated as a lake, and it continues to be a lake. And so the other question is, if a lake property is sold, will the balance of an assessment be paid at closing? No, you have two options with assessments. You can pay them all up front. So whatever your 40-year number would be without interest, you could pay it up front. Or you could pay it by the tax season, or annually, if you will. And whatever's left, that obligation goes to the next owner. You can't grow food on the lake bottom, if that was one of the questions. So the lake bottom, you cannot plant things. Again, the DER, we can't farm on the lake bottom. I'll make that statement, and pretty sure that I'll be supported by the DEQ on that one. What else do we got?
So there's a couple questions about like NRCS funding. If people haven't heard from NRCS, what should they do? When might they hear?
Yeah, so maybe Dave, you want to give a couple updates? Why don't we just do a little bit, get all the NRCS kind of overviews today. It's kind of like where are we at on it and what we're trying to do with it to go with that.
Yeah,
that
so
gives me a chance to
this is Dave Rothman. A couple of comments about NRCS and property that's been reported as having erosion problems. First of all, we are, I don't know if do we have this posted yet, the map?
Yeah.
We have a map on the Four Lakes Task Force website that shows the lakes and has a color code for properties that have been reported and are either approved as eligible for funding, are found to be ineligible, or we're still in the process of making that decision, or NRCS is in the process of making the decision. Any property that does not have one of those three color codes, which are red, green, and beige, as I remember, those are apparently not in our database. And if you own one of those properties, you should contact us and make sure that your erosion complaint gets into our database. We are currently working on the highest priority erosion projects first. Those are the projects where there's a risk that if the erosion problem is not dealt with before the spring runoff, that the structures on the property may actually fail and fall into the lake bottom. We have some properties that are in a real dire situation. We have addressed all of the ones in the greatest danger. We're now starting to work our way down the list to properties that do not need such immediate attention. There still are probably 100 properties we need to have NRCS inspect and judge whether they're eligible or ineligible for NRCS grant support. That process is going to go on through probably the end of September.
Thank you. Sure. I'm like loaded with preparing now, Kayla. Okay. Had some other questions here, which I think one was, can we have what's Dow Chemical's involvement? Dow Chemical has no really governance involvement in this. They're just a big citizen, I guess, if you count things, but they're basically just have input. They've been very supportive of Four Lakes. If you saw the video, we encourage you to look at that, but Dow was very supportive there. They've funded us in some donations. I think $250,000 to date has been spent with Dow. They brought us some resources to help and some volunteers like other companies, so they've been proactive, but they're not directly in the governance. They see this as a community issue that they want to support, but they're not leading in it. The other thing is, can we post the minutes from the meetings with the federal and state meetings? I would say Eagles has regular meetings and others do. They post them on their websites. I think it's worthwhile for us to link to their websites that are relevant to the Four Lakes Task Force, like the Eagle has one and FERC does not have one. FERC's in e-filing, so everything we do with FERC is filed, and we try to produce all those on the website. So I do actually think we're open in what we're doing here, and I think those structures are there, but we need to, I guess, find if we can put some of those other links so people can want to read through that. We have no objections to that. There was a question here of a rumor that we would do half of Wixom's lakes, either the west side or the east side. I think that rumor actually came from Boyce, who kind of suggested to people in the community that they could put a coffer in front of where the M30 bridge is and kind of fill up the west side of the dam. So that, I guess, was something he was proposing to people in the community. That's a really, kind of, it's really challenging to imagine. It's stupid is what the fact that you would think that you could go in and just remodify a lake structure, put a temporary dam in front of M30 and not deal with the tobacco spillway is just kind of playing with people's kind of hearts here, which I think is wrong. So no, the idea here is there's a lot of hydrology and a lot of study that has to go into this thing to work with, and no, that's not going to happen that way in the period we're talking about here. We're not going to have a short-term fix to get part of Wixom Lake up. That's just a fact. I apologize for it being a fact, but it is. Filling of the lakes, how long does it take? It depends on the seasons, but I would say in like really rainy seasons, it could actually happen in days. In normal seasons when you fill it up, it's probably a couple months if you're in a low season like right now to do, but it's not like years. It's done within the season and stuff and planned. So I think that's kind of the thing to do. If there's a question on Secord, and it's what's been asked, is there's a auxiliary spillway required on Secord. Can the water come up without that? And so here's how FERC would approach that, and how, if Boyce would be kind of transparent about this, it'd be pretty clear. But let us kind of restate it again. There's a bunch of repairs that need to occur that are just part of maintenance and repairs, and some issues that occurred during the flooding, during this flood. So neither Smallwood or Secord didn't get 100% clear on that. They have cleanup to do, and there were about 30 items, excluding the spillway, that Boyce asked them to address in these engineering reports. They haven't been addressed. They will have to be addressed. So if Boyce doesn't respond to them when we get the dams, we're going to have to go through all those things and make sure we feel they're safe. Then the next thing is, we know there's a spillway requirement. We know that will take multiple years. We will have to have a financing plan and a strategy to implement that spillway to gain FERC confidence. And then we would have to have a plan of how we would manage and mitigate operations without that spillway. So it's possible to bring it up without a spillway. We ran that way before, but at that time there was a view that the owner was going to give an answer by February of this year, which they did not. So we would have to, kind of come back and have a position on how the spillways would be done, and then have a view to mitigate the safety either through operations of levels or different seasons or different structures to mitigate the risk of not having that spillway. So I would say, yes, it's possible to bring the dams up without the spillway, but we have to have a total plan to FERC, which Boyce did not, and unfortunately, we're gonna have to. So I think we can get all that done to make those decisions once we get the property. The spillway is multiple years to do, and we're not sure about where they will feel about the where the independent investigation will fit into that to do. What plan is there to remove the debris on the lake bottoms? Tons of stuff still there. We agree with that. It's part of this NRCS program. We don't want to clear things up on the dam and then have them come back. It's a very large logistics problem to do, and we're trying to work through that to drive. We're looking at a couple of avenues with that. Certainly the NRCS would support that, but it is a very large project to do. So we are looking at alternatives for that, but do occur to do. Where are the donations going currently to work through? Most of the donations are running as we described for them, are running the general kind of operations of the company, of the Four Lakes Task Force organization, and the companies like that we're paying Spicer and those stuff to help us. It's right now, and it's going through all the structure we need for establishing these lake levels, going through things like these studies we just defined, recognizing that we have no source other than grants right now, as long as we're not trying to run the special assessment district. So everything you see doing, these funds are going to work through and stuff to do. If the backhoe reservoir is lowered, won't there, so there's a question on just killing mussels or whatever, and there's an environmental balance between safety and public safety and the environment, and those things all have to be kind of put into this activity. And I think there's going to end up being a lot of studies around the different species as we go forward and how to manage this as we kind of do the construction. So I don't have a specific answer, Kelly, on that right now to work through to do. So the question is, does the Four Lakes Task Force have enough funding to currently perform all the tasks required? I think we feel confident that we have the funding to get through all the feasibility studies and all the schedules we have. So we feel good on the long-term structure to go through. We've just got funding from the state to get us through probably this year on some of the, a lot of the erosion issues. But like I said, we're short on, so we can get through all these studies we just described to you today, and we can get to a point that we can get interim financing by March. And so we feel strong about that. What we're missing right now is missing right now is basically the funding to meet the NRCS grants, and we're working with the homeowners and the state to kind of fill that out. So we're running these different tracks, but we're confident we can get to we're going to stay on track with the ideas to get to the lakes and stuff to do. There's a question from Jean on surveys. Could we go through that?
She said a feedback from the survey is that a certain percent of residents don't support the assessment required to rebuild. Then what?
So there's not a vote here. So, you know, we kind of pursued different ways of a referendum or a survey, or if we would go through petition or whatever. So this isn't a vote. It will inform the counties on what they view. Obviously, if the petition came out that 0 people wanted it, then I guess we'd have a different view. But the issue is to try and understand people's view of acceptability and people's view of affordability, and how we stage things and work through that. So it's a format. We'll be transparent on it. You know, there's a lot of work to unwind this. And the other thing I would point out to people, if we don't bring the lakes back up, you can't leave the rivers the way they are. You can't leave dams halfway in and halfway out. You either have to have a dam and a lake, or you have to spend a lot of money to get them back into rivers. And our view would be is that you're going to have a big assessment either way, and we'd rather have an assessment with a lake on it. And so that's what we're focused on right now. I think we're getting down to, my numbers are kind of dwindling down. So we're going to finish up the Q&A. I know this was, we expect this to generate a lot of questions and a lot of concerns, a lot of issues. And the more information we try to provide you, I'm sure it's going to bring up more. And that's good. And so what we want to do is have a really robust kind of understanding of this as we go through the next 6 months and get these kind of facts all laid out. And we want to be transparent on that. We encourage you to go back through the presentation. There are some references for meetings that we're going to have. And we'll make sure we kind of communicate that to you as we go forward. With that, we're going to go over the public section. And then, by the way, there's a report I wanted to make that's coming out as well, right? That covers this in detail. So encourage you to read that and then come back with the Q&A, and we'll have structures around that. So at this point in time, we're going to basically go back to the agenda on the slides and finish up the business.
Is it on this up there? On yours?
Board of Directors action?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm not looking at anything other than this question mark thing now. I think I'm a computer guy, and you kind of ruined me.
Yeah, I'm terrible. It's contagious.
Okay. So there's 2 things. We had a 2020 governance. We have a document that shows the boards and structures and priorities. That was reviewed with the board committee, or the board governance committee, and reviewed then by the board. That will be posted on the website. It's basically an update on the roles and responsibilities of the different committees and our focus on the plans going forward. And that was updated because we had a plan for this year that was changed, obviously, in May. And then this restoration and recovery plan that will be posted, that we want to give this summary first, and once we get it approved, we will post it on the website tomorrow sometime. So with that, I think we can have both motions done together. So if we could get a motion on approving the restoration and recovery plan and the governance document.
So
Second?
second.
Okay. Can we do a roll call on that?
Dave Kepler,
Yes.
Adam Beebe. Give him a second to unmute himself, maybe. I think I see him on here.
Okay.
Adam?
Yeah.
There you
Got it. Okay. Good job, Adam. We knew you could come through. Okay.
go. John Beckett,
Yes.
Carl Kerr,
Yes.
Phil Dast, Joel Vernier,
Yes.
Jeanette Snyder,
Yes.
and Mark Mudge, we know is absent.
The Mark is absent. Okay, so we have a majority, and it passes. So that's good. So at this point, just a movement, any other open business from the board? Okay, and then a movement to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Okay.
Support.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Bye.
Opposition? Hearing none, the meeting is closed. And thank you everyone for joining us, and hopefully we provided at least an outline of where we're going, and encourage you to look at the website in the following days, and we'll try to get those answers organized for you that we didn't get. So, okay, thank you very much.